everyone. My name is Dean. You can call me Dean, but in social media, you can find me as Wild Gold Dean. So I've done this a few times. This is Con Survival. We're going to go through a lot of things. Things have changed. I started doing this in 2019, and when I was on a flight from New York to Nashville, Tennessee, on another conference, but it was a pharmacy conference. So I have a lot of conferences and events I go to under my belt. So, and I'm going to go over all these things, and I hope you enjoy it. Next slide. All right, so we're going to go over the overview. So before the con, you have to do a lot of planning and preparation. Time and money you have to save as well. So we'll go over that. Managing time, money, and yourself, your etiquette and networking. That's what you're going to do during the con. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about eating, the right foods as well. So you've seen a little, if you've been here from the very start with the stream, they went over a little bit about the food. So you'll get, this will be a review in case you missed any of that. After the con, we'll talk about self-care. So again, we'll talk about the healthy habits to focus on and how to fight the con blues and the con crud. As a pharmacist, you will see it, okay? You saw my title in my previous one. It's a PharmD. I got my Doctor of Pharmacy degree in 2013. And that's in addition to being a nerd and all that stuff. So, I got yourself covered. Next slide. So preparing to schedule for con, of course, you have to look for a con. There are so many sites to look for a con. So each con, they have their own sites. And some of the con sites I would go to is animecons.com, fancons.com, conventionscene.com, etc. You can do a Google search, but be careful about Google because they may give you some wrong information. But you always have to go to multiple sites to confirm if the event's actually real. A lot of times, if the event has its own website, you can go check it yourself. So people have different preferences in terms of size. So if it's a space or amount of people, some people, if you're new, for example, it's important that you go to a smaller con with less people so you can get adjusted to it before you get to the big ones. So location, and so it's important to go to something that's not too far if it's something that's not familiar to you. The type of con, so there's anime, there's furry, there's a toy con coming up, I think this month in Brooklyn, Navy Yard. And COVID guidelines, that's very important. And so New York Comic Con, for example, is putting the mask mandate. I know not everyone agrees with it, but given that there's a lot of people, it's important to have the mask mandate. And I'll go over a little bit about that. Is it physical or online? I prefer in person. That's the physical one. But online, a lot of them are free. So I'll go a little bit over about that. Reviews and feedback. So I do the reviews of the cons, okay? Some of them may have, I don't know, where you get the feedback, you can ask other friends about it. Some people will share about it. So if you have the time and money, it's important, you have to register early to save the money. You want to make sure that you get all the conflicts out and try to make space for the con. And then there's the budgeting. Unless if your sugar daddy is Elon Musk or yes, or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, you must budget because you have to have enough money and time so you can go back home. You don't want to go broke before you leave the con. How are you going to get home? All right. Even if you're driving, you're going to need gas. So we'll talk about that. Next slide. So COVID-19, you already know, we're going to go a little bit about it. So a lot of the events have been postponed, or they were canceled, or they went online. It's simply because at the time there were no vaccines. Now we have the vaccines, and please, I strongly encourage, get it, and I'll explain a little bit later on. So, large gatherings, that's a super spreader. So if people were to gather a lot, people get sick. Some cons rolled over, not once, but twice. So Anime Expo is one of them. Anime Boston is another one. And some canceled, as I said, some canceled cons went online or virtual. And some online cons, like PuchiCon, for example, made their own online ones. It's on Zoom, Discord, Instagram, or a mix of any of those social media apps. Next slide. So budgeting, okay? Since Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk are not your sugar daddies, you got to estimate how much you're going to spend, all right? And the earlier you start, saving up for it, the more money you'll have in your war chest. So you're able to buy the merch that you want. Okay, so you have to take into account the how much it costs for a badge, how much you have to pay for transportation. I'm going to go more into detail in that, in addition to the prices. How much you have to pay for a hotel, how much food you're going to spend your money on, the merch you want to get. Okay, so there are a couple ways of doing it. You can actually put a certain amount of money every week, or you can do it every month. There is an app called Twine where you have your own account. And it takes money from your checking account on a regular basis, depending on how you want to set it. And you don't have to think about it. The thing about the Twine app is that it also builds interest, even though it's a little bit of money. It's like chump change. You never know. It goes a long way. Next slide. No sugar daddies or mommies here. So you have to be proactive when it comes to money. Why? Because you have to be prepared for any emergencies or something that comes up. Okay, sometimes Uber and Lyft get really expensive now. So if you're really in a rush or something happened, sometimes in New York City, if you're going to be in a con, the subway's unpredictable. So if something happens with the subway, sometimes you might have to take Uber or Lyft, and it's much more expensive in New York City. If you want to go in New York Comic Con or Anime NYC, you have to keep track of each and every cent and dollar. I'll explain in a little bit how I do it. So you will avoid impulse and reactionary spending. So you want to think and strategize before you're making a decision. And you got to always ask yourself, is it worth it? I'll actually go into detail when we get into the artist alley and the dealer's room. And you always have to ask yourself, as I said earlier in the introduction, will I have enough money to go home? Will I have enough money to go for future cons? And some cons could be free, especially the online virtual ones. I haven't seen a lot of free cons in person, but just pay attention with the costs. Next slide. So when in doubt, write it out so you can manage your time and money. I know it's a little bit small, but every single year, ever since 2007, I buy a book that has 24 hours in each day, because we're New Yorkers. Well, I live in New York City, so it's 24/7. And for the hours that when you're sleeping, you can use those notes as extra notes. You can write things down. So on the bottom, I write down how much I spend. That's the minus, and how much, and the plus signs is how much I gain. You see all these pluses over there is because Chase was so generous enough to reimburse me for $300. I think it's every year for travel. And this was for Anime Next in 2019. So you'll see BNHA photo shoot and whatnot. And it's a little blurry, but you get the whole idea. Next slide. So that's one example. You can do your budgets however you want it. Anime Expo has its own. So it'll have a whole list of it. It depends on what technique works for you. Next slide. So registering for a con event. So first thing is you always have to find out what con you want to go to. As I said, there's animecons.com, fancons.com. Those are the two main sites that I use. For most cons, they have a website where you have a link where you can order tickets. You just place the order. However, like one con, like New York Comic Con, they use third party sites, and they make it so complicated. So you have to know how the process goes. Okay, New York Comic Con, you have to do a fan verification, and there might be some other ways to get the ticket. So one example, you had to pay another $99. So you have to be a Metaverse super fan member to get that early access to tickets if you really want to go to New York Comic Con. So as I said, there's different ways of getting the tickets and badges. So you want to get the badges as soon as possible, because for a lot of the cons, they sell out right away. Next slide. So finding a place to stay. So you have to book early. So when you book early, you not only save money, you get your spot. But if you procrastinate, you wait until the last minute, you may not get the one you want. And if you get the one you want, it may be really expensive. So you have to shop around. Don't always go for Airbnb. If you're able to, please go over with the reviews. I've heard some horror stories about it. So they also have hotel blocks as well that the cons provide. So as I said, consider price, quality, and distance. I like to go a little close to the con as much as possible. I'm not a big quality guy. If I'm able to sit on the floor, if I'm able to sleep on the floor and it's clean, I'll do it. But not everyone has the same preference as I do. Okay, cheapest isn't always the best. So if you really want those conveniences, are you willing to spend more? That's something you want to ask yourself about. And higher quality doesn't always equate to convenience as well. Before booking, always read the fine print. Next slide. So here's one example. This is for PucciCon in Atlantic City. The Showboat website, it started out as $389, and then they gave a little discount to $311.20. You save something, but no, I want to go further. So I went to Snap Travel, and I only spent, $269, and I saved $120. Yes, that's true. Okay, I'm not going to show everything because it has the confidential information. I could use that $120 on merch, for example. Next slide. So after booking, call the hotel. That's the best thing to do. You want to make sure that you're in it. You're in the system. And check their help and support page just in case. Because if you change your mind, if something happens, how does a refund policy go? And my tip is usually max 5 per room. If you want to go less than that, even better. It's just you don't want to have it too crowded, okay? And I'll explain a little bit more why having too much people may be an issue. It doesn't have to be with a hotel room, it's also with a con as well. So, did they get their COVID vaccine? All right, let's talk. When you get your 2 shots of Moderna or Pfizer, once you get your second shot, you're not fully vaccinated yet. You're fully vaccinated 2 weeks afterwards. If you have the Johnson & Johnson shot, assuming that you don't get the blood clots or the Guillain-Barré syndrome, that's the one with the nerve issue, you have to wait 2 weeks afterwards. A negative COVID PCR test. So you have to do it 3 days in advance. The thing is, PCR takes a while. You don't want to do it too early. Rapid doesn't always work. There was just recently, the Yankees got tested positive for a rapid test, and then they did a confirmatory for PCR. Now they're fine because sometimes they'll have like what we call debris, like viral debris. They don't have the RNA. That's the one that causes the damage. Okay, they have just the proteins of it after they recover. Find out if they do free bag code check. Some venues and the cons do it. Sometimes the hotels can do it. You don't want to be carrying your luggage everywhere you go. It's a lot of stress. All right, for online cons, you need a good Wi-Fi, like we have right now. You need a good Wi-Fi so you can get the best out of this stream. Next slide. Taking down notes. Thank you. If one or more people will room with you, obviously you got to find out who you'll invite and know who you're inviting, because you have to know their characteristics. You want to make sure the chemistry is good. And I would background check everyone, okay, even my family members, because can they get along? Are they sick? Are they vaccinated? If they're not vaccinated, wear a mask, and I want to make sure you have a negative COVID test. Determine who the leader is. So basically, that's the person who collects all the money to pay for the costs of the hotel. Communication is key. So create a group chat. Preferably get everyone's cell numbers, because not everyone will have Wi-Fi, but sometimes you will have cell service. I don't know why, but. And then you want to if you're the leader, you want to determine how you can evenly split the cost of the room. Next slide. Would you want your hotel room to be like this? No. Next slide. So emphasize the rules for everyone to follow. Please keep it neat. You don't want to see that picture that you just saw, okay? You got to clean up after yourselves. I think we're all adults here. So it's obvious, no eating on the bed. You eat on a table. Okay, don't eat on the carpet. If there's carpet, don't eat on the carpet. You're gonna give the hotel staff a hard time. Hotel staff may actually charge you extra. I've heard these horror stories, so you gotta clean up after yourselves. With your stuff, when you have the luggage, I like to put everything in one area. If you leave it as a mess and you're trying to go to a panel or some kind of event and you're in a rush, you'll save time if you put everything in one place. But if you put all over the place, then you're gonna have to spend time looking for that stuff. Be mindful of other guests in nearby rooms. So don't be noisy. Okay, gotta watch with the alcohol. I will go over the alcohol. Oh, trust me, we will. Okay. And if you're below 21, you should avoid it. If you're a designated driver, avoid it. If you're pregnant, avoid it. If you're taking medications, avoid it. So obviously, you got to be courteous, respectful, and polite. Next slide. That's exactly right. They charge $250. It's really bad. So you gotta really take care of the room once you leave. Transportation planning, very important. So you budget extra time and you look for good deals. So you go to different sites. I have an app called Wanderoo, and then I use that because it goes through different sites. If you do the flying, I do kayak. Kayak goes to different sites as well. You can do Amtrak. You can go to the different plane carriers. All right, so you gotta know the schedules, especially when you're taking trains and buses. So I'm going to Otakon early August. I have everything that's planned for. Got to know the gates, platforms, and tracks. So there was one friend. I have two friends who left Penn Station trying to go to a con in New Jersey. All right, I have one group, and we left Port Authority, and we arrived there almost 2 hours early. And my friend hated me for that. But I was monitoring the other group because they took the wrong train. Instead of going to the northern Jersey where they're supposed to go, they went into more central Jersey. And I have two other friends trying to pick them up, trying to go to a con. So you got to pay attention. That's why it's important to budget extra time so you have enough time to familiarize yourself with the stations. I think it's Google Street View, doesn't always look into going to those different stations. They only look in the outside. So don't expect Google to do everything for you. Always prepare for yourself. So again, shop with different sites. As I said, Google Maps is a great tool. It's not the only tool. So you have to use other tools to confirm that things are set. Next slide. So research different ways to get there. I know New York City subway, there are different ways to get there. So is it better if you want to fly? Is it better if you want to take a bus? Is it better to take a train? Always have paper and electronic documents if possible. All right, in case if your phone dies. But even if your phone dies, always have like one or two battery packs. All right, but still, I always keep the paper one just to be safe. And also, you got to bring your proof of COVID test that's negative or the COVID vaccination. I have the COVID cards. But not only that, I actually put it on my phone as well. I took a picture of it just in case if I lose it. So once you book, you have to monitor frequently because sometimes if you're going to be flying, the flights could be canceled. Again, budget extra time. God forbid a flight gets canceled. So you got to be prepared for these things. Next slide. So example for this is a bus fare. So we're going to do some more savings. So that's the PuchiCon planning that I'm going to do for Atlantic City. New Jersey Transit is $70. I found a price that was $41.90. I saved almost $30. Okay, but again, you have to shop around. Next slide. By the way, that's real money that I saved. This is an example of my own COVID test before the vaccinations came out. And I was negative, but there are different kinds. This one is from City MD. Next slide. So I hope everything's okay. It's just, if I'm too fast, let me know so I can slow down. I know it's a lot of information. So this is an example of my vaccination information. So that's my vaccine card. Only in New York, they have the vaccine passport. It's called the Excelsior Pass. So for me, that's a confirmatory. It's confirmatory that that the card is legit, because there will be some people who will fake their vaccination cards because, oh, I don't want to wear a mask, for example. Next slide. So, the mask mandate has actually loosened a little bit, but still in transportation. So when you're taking a plane, train, bus, whatever it is, you always have to wear a mask. Next slide. Why you still need to mask up. All right. I know people don't want to wear masks, especially when they're outside. So this is the Swiss cheese model. All right. The vaccines are not 100% effective, but they're like in the 90s. So you run the risk of something called breakthrough infections. So this could happen when you're in, like, near Comic Con. It's a lot of people and there's no social distancing and no one's wearing a mask. So in addition to getting vaccinated, you have one protection. When you wear a mask, you have another protection. If you don't touch your face, if you use your Purell like a few times a day, if you wash your hands, if the ventilation and the airflow is going well, if people are getting tested negative, and if sick people aren't there, that's a lot of layers. And you want to have the layers so no one gets sick. Next slide. So domestic travel, this is from the CDC. So again, it's better to be fully vaccinated because you're less likely to get it or spread it. You still have to wear a mask, of course. You want the more layers of protection and the more tools you use to stop the spread, you not only help yourself, but you also help other people not getting sick. So you don't need to quarantine when you're fully vaccinated. Okay, as long as you don't have the symptoms. If you have the symptoms, then we have an issue because that could spread the disease, especially with the Delta variant going on. So just as one tip, it's not so much the poison, it's really the dose of it. So, when with the Delta variant, you don't need much of a dose to get sick now. So that's why it's important to get vaccinated. So for the 2 shots, you have to have your 2 shots. One shot's not enough. There is science to prove that. And you still have, as I said, you still have to follow safety precautions. All right. So the masks and the hand washing are important. If possible, social distance. I know I take the train and bus. It's hard to social distance, so it's important to wear a mask. Next slide. So here you can screenshot this, okay, or take a picture of it. That's just a chart of what I just went over. And if you're unvaccinated or partially unvaccinated, try to avoid those. Try to avoid other people who are high risk, regardless of test result. Monitor your symptoms. And sometimes the federal government and the state or local governments can have different protocols. You always want to go for the most stringent and the most safest. Next slide. So international travel, I'm assuming, most people are not going to go internationally because a lot of the countries are dealing with spikes in COVID due to the Delta variant. I know for the Tokyo Olympics, they're only doing spectators. And they're not doing, well, I'm sorry, they're not inviting any spectators. It's just going to be the athletes, for example. So it's you have to be fully vaccinated. If you don't want to get vaccinated, then you have to go through all these quarantines, the tests. Okay, you also have to check what the country's rules and regulations are in terms of COVID. So in addition to checking for the CDC travel guidance and restrictions, so check the destination's COVID and travel guidance restrictions, get tested 3 to 5 days prior. There's no need to get tested before the US at this point, so things can change. And no need to quarantine after arriving to the US, unless of course you have the symptoms. But things can change, okay, given that the Delta variant is swirling around. Next slide. So this is just the international travel. That's just a little bit of a summary. If you're flying, before you arrive to US, you need to have a negative test no more than 3 days before travel, or you have to have evidence that you recovered from COVID in the past 3 months, regardless of vaccination status. That's just something new that's added in. All right. So if you see the fully vaccinated one, you don't need to get tested before traveling US. If you're not vaccinated, you have to get tested. So next slide. Flying, that's the fastest yet most expensive. I find flying to be a bit inconvenient because you have to get there 2 hours prior to you have to get to the security gate 2 hours prior to the planes leaving the airport. And I don't like that. If it's international, it's 3 hours. So as I said before, shop around for a lot of good options and deals. So kayak.com goes to different sites. Skyscanner has you become more flexible with which airports you want to go to. So again, just like with hotels, you book early and fly on, and this time you fly in the least busiest times if possible. So you already know about the documentation when it comes to the COVID test or the COVID vaccination. Got to have your ID, got to have your passport if you're going international. This is in about 2 years. You're gonna soon need to be doing real ID, but you don't have to worry too much about it right now. You also want to research on what to carry or check, such as props. So with sharp items, especially with metals, it's very likely that it's not going to be allowed. But we're going to go more into detail with weapons and props. Next slide. So taking the trains and buses when you're going long distances. So it's cheaper, but it takes a little bit more time. You don't have to arrive too early, but at least 30, 60 minutes. You already know about the documents. My tip is if it's less than 300 miles, flying may not be recommended for you because it may take just the same time as flying in that kind of distance compared to the trains and buses, but it's up to you. Next slide. So public transportation, even easier. So and convenient and cheaper, so you can study the maps and schedules. It's a little bit more flexible as well. Know how to pay the fare, and always have different ways to get around. God forbid if a train breaks down or if one section of a line is not running. Next slide. So driving, there's more freedom, yet there's more responsibility. You got to take care of your car as if it's your child. So going to the car shop is like going to an annual physical. So you gotta take a break every 3 hours or every 100 miles, whichever is more convenient for you. Gotta stretch. We don't want any blood clots, do we? No. Carpooling, passengers have to give money for gas, wear and tear, tolls, tips, etc. Just as if you're staying in a hotel, you split the cost. Driver has to choose the music because driver needs to concentrate. Do you want to get into crash? No. So driver has to concentrate. Next slide. A car is a big responsibility. That's right. Cosplay planning, I don't advise on con crunching, but I think we all do it at some point. You have to research their dress code and weapons policy. So that determines how you're gonna cosplan and what cosplays you're going to bring. Because you don't want you want to have a good time. You don't want to have your items being confiscated or whatnot because you didn't plan for it. And you want to plan how you want to put your cosplay together. So you want to set your goals and objectives and stick to it. So, and you got to give yourself enough time so you can, if you want to make the cosplay, and start with what you have first, and before buying more stuff or crafting your cosplays. And you have to gather the materials and tools. Always cost test. You don't want to have a wardrobe malfunction during a con, do we? No. Next slide. So weapons and props, you got to research the policy. Each con and venue has their own, and they change every year. So you got to exercise good judgment and consider the material used. Live weapons, like really sharp ones, like the really metal ones. I'm not talking about the EVA foams. So if this sword is an EVA foam, right over here, there it is. So see, it's a little bit more flexible. The thing is, though, even though it's not metal, you want to also be careful as well. So for the most part, you keep it in the sheath. Next slide. So how? Oh, there's Cat over there. She was Snow White, and that's me posing. That was at PucciCon in Fort Lee at early it's June 5th, I believe. So how will you carry and transport them? You have to research with the website when it comes to trains, buses, or whatnot. I know for New York City buses and subways, I'm able to carry it as long as I keep it in the sheath. If it looks dangerous, try not to expose it. So if you have kunais, if you're doing a Naruto cosplay, you hide it in the bag. Cons require weapons and props to be inspected, so be prepared for that. So always bring your props. If it passes, sometimes they'll put a tape around this, or they'll put a zip tie. If it fails, you're gonna have to bring it back to the hotel. Next slide. Oh, Winter took the picture. I didn't even realize it. So when you, if it's a really sharp weapon like a bow and arrow or guns or even with swords, you need to disable or tether them. So you want to make sure for, even with some swords that are with a lot of metal, you want to make sure it doesn't come out of the sheath. Or with the bows and arrows, you want to make sure it doesn't release if you just use it for all the pictures and I'll just So disable projectile weapons, so cover the holes of the guns, for example. Use caution with sharp, pointy objects, and handle them with care. Because especially with cons with a lot of people, you want to be aware of your surroundings and you want to try to not have the items exposed so it doesn't hurt anyone. So safety is important. So no explosives, of course not, because it's a fire hazard. Even bubbles, you want to be very careful because it may damage the cosplay. So don't be surprised that any of the items get confiscated. So please be careful. Pepper sprays, they may confiscate. They confiscated my pepper spray when I was in the subway because they saw it, but people use it as self-defense. So next slide. So the week before the con, you prepare your travel checklist. You prepare your cosplays and the clothes you're gonna wear, and try not to carry too much. Some cons have the app. If not, you can always download the schedule, and do not try not to overschedule yourself, or else you're not gonna have a fun time. You're gonna be running around a lot. You want to give yourself some space to breathe, and get your travel itinerary ready. So determine when to wake up, when to leave home. As I said, budget extra time. Next slide. So that's just a list, con checklist from geeksgathering.com. I'm not going to go too much into it. Next slide. That's just some of the important ones. So you'll see like the cameras, the belts, the cards. Got to bring your COVID documents. Very important thing, bring your deodorant. I don't want to smell your body odor, okay? Bring your medications. Bring your battery packs, okay? Of course, your soap and shampoo. I have my own toothbrush and a toothpaste. Very small in my bag. I carry it all the time. I always bring a pen, paper. I have my planner with me, hotel info, tickets, badges. You can't put everything in a phone. What if you drop your phone and you can't find it? Then all your information's there. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you always have a backup plan in what you put in your phone and what in the physical things you're going to carry. Next slide. Also, stay hydrated. Have a lot of water too. So if you want to have a cosplay repair kit, some cons actually have a cosplay repair place there. So I always have not so much of Velcro. I have a lot of the sewing ones. I sometimes when the cosplays when my costumes have a hole, for example, I would have a needle and thread in order to fix it. I have a paint. Like I cosplay Jalal, so what I do is I always carry it around. I sweat a lot, so I always have to redo it. And those are just some of the examples. Next slide. And this is also optional as well. So medical first aid kits, just in case if you get injured. I always try to carry band-aids. I have a pulse ox. I'm asthmatic, and since COVID's going on, it could actually come in handy. God forbid something happens. So most important thing, bandages. Thermometer, you don't have to. It's just if you really want to go that extra step. Next slide. 25 minutes. So hygiene, I think everyone should know this. Got to put your deodorant. Got to clean yourself, basically. Bring hand sanitizer and also wear a mask. Next slide. So now you arrived at the con. Get there super early. Get your badges right away. Stay hydrated. Find a free bag code check, or you can do it in a hotel or a venue. And you want to reevaluate where you want to go to the con. So you always want to keep checking your schedule. So prioritize if there are overlaps. If there are events that you really, really want to go to. So if it's a very popular voice actor or whatnot, you would go there a lot more earlier, give yourself enough time. And as I said, do not overschedule. You want to have breaks in between. And always have backup plans in case you're not able to make it to an event. Or if the event's too crowded, they'll shut it down. Have a backup plan. Next slide. If I speak too fast, let me know. I know it's a lot of information. So the con breakdown anatomy. So not all cons will have all of that, but these are just the things to look at. The first three things, you got to be careful. Watch with your money with this one. So the dealer's room, artist alley, and autographs. So those where a lot of monies are. So a lot of cons, you'll see panels, photo shoots, meetups, concerts, dances. There's gaming as well and contests. So it's really a fun place. Okay, that's why I keep going to cons over and over again. Next slide. So online virtual cons, I'm just gonna go swift through this one. It's like going to a con without leaving your home, or you can go wherever you want to. It's easy to attend. You just have to have good Wi-Fi, and a lot of times it's free. But for exclusive content, depending on the con, you might have to pay. And these are the examples there for the online virtual cons. Next slide. So it's an alternative, but it's not really a replacement, at least in my opinion. Okay, so just similar to an in-person con, there could be an artist alley dealer's room, but it's going to be online shopping, but they're going to be delivered to you. They'll do panels online, like we're doing right now, and they can also do the concerts and dances, but it's going to be, of course, virtually. And when you do the cosplay contest, it's not going to be in person, so you have to take pictures of your own cosplays. Next slide. So 621 rule, it's going to be a little bit different because reason being is that some people's sleep needs are different. Everyone's different. So if you sleep at least 6 hours, it should be enough. Now, if you sleep 6 hours a day for long periods of time, we have an issue. Okay, but if it's for a con, you can maybe sleep a little bit less. But you still have to follow the general recommendation of sleeping at least 7-8 hours a day. Now, for the meals, if you want to keep your metabolism going, as with the previous two people, you can eat 6 times a day, but with smaller but more frequent meals. Okay, sometimes we don't always have the time for it, so we want to stick to 2 to 3 meals a day. I put a multivitamin there because we don't always get our needs for the vitamins, because a lot of times when you're in a con, you're going to be eating unhealthy, so you want to be careful with that. And you have to take at least 1 shower or bath a day. Okay, we already went through this. All right, I don't want to smell your body odor. Next slide. So managing time, money, energy, anxiety, your goal is to have fun. You want to keep your schedule realistic, balanced, and flexible. Again, you got to have some breathing room in between. Be prepared for changes and cancellations. And I would add alarms to my phone on that as well. You have to wear comfortable shoes. When it comes to cosplay, you also want to match with the seasons as well. You don't want to sacrifice too much comfort. You don't want to get sick. You also have to keep track of your time and money. And if you need some time to breathe, or if you're tired, look for some quiet, safe spaces. As I said, you have try not to overdo it. Next slide. So Christine Mr. Andino has a spoon theory. So if you want, it's optional. You can measure by the amount of spoons. So the more rest you get, the more spoons you have. So, but if you're going to do an action, you're going to lose spoons. Next slide. So okay, it's a little cut off. I apologize. So that's just some of the examples. Sometimes if you're gonna run, for example, you're gonna need more spoons. It really depends on your stamina. So that's just one example you can use. Next slide. Wow, time flies. Wow. So a lot of people with chronic illnesses or disabilities or with mental health issues, people use that. So as I said, it's measured by the amount of spoons. If you run out of spoons early, you're going to use it for tomorrow. So you got to be careful. So once you're going to treat it like it's money. All right. And you can start at 20 spoons depending on your energy. Sometimes you can start with 100, for example. But since everyone's different, same activity does not equal the same cost of spoons between each person. Next slide. It's weird because time flies when I do a presentation, but with everyone else, time goes a little bit slow. So ask yourself before making a purchase at an artist alley or a dealer's room, or if you want to get an autograph, why am I here? How do I feel? Do I need this? What if I wait? How do I pay for it? And for tangible stuff, where will I put it? A lot of times my room is full with so many things. Look at my posters. So a lot of times I'm not going to buy it. Next slide. So etiquette cosplay is never consent. Keep your hands to yourself. Do not be like Governor Cuomo. Please don't. You got to respect each other. And when you're doing photos or video recording, you always have to ask permission. Don't do sneak attacks. Some people will get a lot of anxiety with it. Okay, and it's okay to say no. When someone says no to you, you have to move on. Next slide. So if you feel someone's harassing you, you state the address, the behavior, tell the person it's wrong, and ignore and stay away from the person. It's better to be with a group of friends because at least you have that kind of layer of protection. If it persists, I would try to take a picture of the person and report it to staff, con ops, or the police. Next slide. Please no Cuomo at cons. I hope not. So with etiquette, don't block people's traffic, okay? If you want to do a shoot, stand aside, okay? And you gotta respect people's space, as I've said before, and be alert and aware of your surroundings. Next slide. So cosplay judging is only for cosplay contests, okay? If you have nothing good to say, it's best not to say it. No one's perfect. It's an art. Cosplay is costume and play. There are people who just want things to be canon. Not everything has to be canon. It's an art. You can do different versions of the cosplay. And I'll explain one example for that. As I said, there are many ways to cosplay. You got to compliment and acknowledge your effort. Praise and motivate them, and also if you see something that they're going to do better on, you tell them, hey, you're doing great. Maybe if you add this one, for example, just say it as an advice. As I said, that goes along with constructive criticism. You don't have to love and hate a cosplay. Not everyone's a pro. Just because you don't like the character you see someone cosplaying doesn't mean you hate the person. Okay, you got to respect each and every person because there is a human right behind the cosplay. Next slide. Yeah, that's me. I was me. So that's one example. Team Rocket joining the Akatsuki. All right, there's nothing canon about it, but it looks great. Next slide. One person dressing up half Sasuke, half Naruto, and then on the right side there are 12 different Sasukes. Next slide. So cosplay positivity, you should know this. No matter how tall or how short, your weight, your race, your gender, your age, your skill level. Next slide. You can cosplay whoever you want and you look amazing to it. And plus, beauty is pretty subjective, so everyone has different tastes, okay? You gotta end cosplay hate, and it starts here at this stream. Next slide. So networking, be yourself. You never know. You can actually be friends with them and you can learn new ideas. Or you can get your foot to a job. Who knows? Okay, you can make friends. As I said, you can exchange info and ideas. Be respectful, honest, straightforward. You can ask about cosplay interests. You can share passions. You can even speak to to people at the end of the panels, with the speakers, and you can also exchange Instagram info. I mean, Instagram tags or Twitter, Facebook, whatnot. Next slide. So what I do is, even though I'm autistic, I'm trying. Always like to practice. Always have a script. Try not to act like a robot though. So I always keep notes and reminders. It's a learning thing. No one's gonna be perfect at it, but always have an open mind. Not everyone will befriend you, and it's okay. It's not always your fault. At the same time, don't take advantage of anyone, and the other way around, don't let anyone take advantage of you. At the same time, you got to respect your space and don't blow up their feed or their phone. Next slide. So more networking tips. So if you have sharing common interests, there's online groups and forums. You can do that like after a con. So icebreakers. So you can ask, have you been to a con before? What anime do you like? Of course, you greet and introduce each other. What ships do you like? What characters? You can ask for help or advice for a cosplay or whatnot, or you can compliment of a cosplayer an outfit. Next slide. So networking, there are different places. So obviously, dealer's room, artist alley, different areas, parties, dances, lines, obviously, meetups. So there's so many different places you can meet and greet. Next slide. So con parties and dances, as I said before, 21 plus only. You got to limit your alcohol. If you're below 21, don't drink alcohol, please. If you're taking medications, don't drink alcohol. No illicit drugs. I know marijuana is legal, but still, there are kids in the con as well. So put it away. No illicit drugs. No recreational drugs. If you do party, try to have a full meal, just in case if you're going to drink some alcohol. You obviously have to stay hydrated, and please don't give in to peer pressure. You do not only what's comfortable, but also do the right thing. Don't get into negativity. Walk away from it, and try to go with friends. And don't overdo it, especially when you party. Okay, so take it easy. Okay, we're here to have fun, not to make mistakes. Next slide. So, I tell people 1 to 2 glasses a day is recommended for drinking alcohol. That's not a glass. Next slide. I'll explain more. So the CDC states that you have to drink, for 1 glass, it's 0.6 ounces, or if you're doing metric system, 18 milliliters of pure alcohol. So it could be 12 ounces of beer. That's about 1.5 cups of beer, or 5 ounces of wine, and 1.5 ounces a shot. So you'll see more percentages, but you'll see it on the bottles. Okay, proof is just another way of measuring the alcohol. So your daily limits, women is 1 glass per day, men is 2 glasses. Men tend to have higher metabolism. And if you're pregnant or nursing, zero alcohol, obviously. But I hope people listen. Let's see. Next slide. So how much is too much? You have to be really careful. So obviously, the ones who doesn't get alcohol, in addition to those who are below 21 or pregnant nursing, if you're a designated driver, you have to stay sober. You want to get into an accident? I know I don't. If you take medications, they could interact. Or those with health conditions, especially with cirrhosis, or if you have liver-related issues, you want to stay away from alcohol. Next slide. So that's just a chart here. So it's also based on how much you weigh. So the skinnier you are, the less of an you're gonna need less out. You'll need less alcohol to get drunk. All right. So the green is when you're not drinking. Yellow is when you're tipsy, and red is when you're really drunk. Next slide. No comments. So not everyone uses this equation. I used the equation actually last week, 1 week from yesterday, when I was at a wedding. I had something called, I think, Truly, and one can is actually one glass of alcohol. It was actually hard seltzer, I believe. So if you want to follow this equation, you do amount of ounces you drink of alcohol times the percentage of pure alcohol. You divide by 100, you get the ounces of pure alcohol. So as a reminder, zero point 0.6 ounces is the daily limit for women per day, and 1.2 for men. Next slide. I'll try to make it as quick as I can. I apologize. So we're gonna make this quick. So I went to a bar and I drank 8 ounces of Hennessy, 40%. How much pure alcohol did I drink? Next slide. So 8 ounces I drank times 40% divided by 100, I get 3.2 ounces of pure alcohol. I'm a guy, so 1.2 is my daily limit. I went overboard, so I'm probably really drunk. Next slide. So please be careful. So tips for reducing alcohol use. So you want to try to control it. I always like to replace it. Now, I barely drink alcohol, to be honest with you, but I know people who love to drink alcohol. You want to, you know, cut down on it. So you want to also remind yourself. So that's just a guide. It's ownyourlimits.org. We'll have more information about that. Next slide. So after the con, if possible, try to go to a feedback session. So if you have any issues with the con, you tell them. It'll make it better for other people who would go to a con because they'll learn from it. They're not going to make any adjustments or fix their mistakes if you don't tell them. So the quote is, "A squeaky wheel gets the grease." Email the con and provide feedback if you're not able to attend the feedback session or panel. You want to maintain contact info with those who you met, keep in touch, share your pics and positive experiences. You want to be careful when you use social media. You don't want to be toxic, of course. And then you can plan for your next event or con. Next slide. So post-con blues and depression. I know I get sad every time a con ends. It's normal. So what I do is I try to focus on something positive. There's the exercise, of course, that we talked about earlier that helps with the mental health. So I talk with friends and family. You don't want to stretch yourself too thin. You want to take it easy. I look forward to another con. I plan for it. That makes me happy. There are some cosplay meetups that you can do with your friends. If you're still sad, you can seek professional help. I see a therapist once a week. So, but I've been doing it since second grade. BetterHelp app has unlimited text and video phone calls, but there's a fee that you have to pay, and then there are group sessions as well on the app. Next slide. So con crud, these things happen. You get sick during or after the con, assuming it's not COVID. So you got to be careful. So a lot of times you get a cold or flu and other illnesses. I've seen an uptick because now people are not wearing the mask because they're vaccinated. Just because you take off your mask and you're vaccinated doesn't mean you're vaccinated with other things. You're only vaccinated with COVID. So you'll still get a common cold, for example. So the poor, if you sleep less hours, a lot less than 6 hours, if you have a poor diet and your hygiene's not very good, it's going to affect you once you get back home. So that's why it's important to take care of yourself before, during, and after the con. So when you're dealing with a large crowd of confined space and you're not wearing a mask, then you're at risk of getting sick, especially with those if you have compromised immune systems. You also want to get tested for COVID maybe about 2-3 days afterwards. If you get tested too early, it may be a false negative. Next slide. So treating con crud, obviously rest in fluids. You can't go wrong with hot chicken noodle soup. Obviously, no alcohol. As a pharmacist, these are just some of these different different medications to use depending on the symptoms. But you always have to read the drug facts at the back of the product, please. So Tylenol, for example, or Motrin or ibuprofen is pain or fever. If you have kidney issues, Try not to take NSAIDs like ibuprofen or Aleve. Aleve is naproxen. Tylenol is usually the safer one. If you have liver issues, you got to be very careful. It's better not to take the Tylenol if you have liver issues. So there's cough drops. I may use one right now afterwards. There's vitamin C that helps with immunity. If you have motion sickness, you can do Dramamine or Meclizine. Another name is Antivert. Again, you have to read the drug label because that's the ones you'll see. In the main label, you'll see different names. Guaifenesin and dextromethorphan is for coughs. Guaifenesin is more of it loosens up the mucus. Dextromethorphan is for generally your dry cough. And then there are the antihistamines. We have a really bad allergy season this year. So your Benadryls, one thing I hate about Benadryl, I fall asleep. So I tend to use Allegra. That tends to work for me, but there are other ones as well. Next slide. All right, so this is just an example. Okay, that what you see at the back of it, you got to read everything. All right, it's going to be very helpful, even if it's just like a few seconds, because you can determine if whether you're able to use it or not. And you also have to know what prescription medications you're taking, so you can watch with those kinds of drug interactions before you take them. Next slide. All right, take home messages. Yes, home stretch. So if there's this is a lot of information, this is a little bit of a summary. So plan early, be organized. Whether you're doing the flights, when you're doing all these preparing for the cosplays, preparing like how much money you're going to spend. Be proactive. Try not to spend a lot. Always be positive. Your goal to go to a con is to be positive and to have fun. Anyone can cosplay. I don't care how old you are, how young you are, or what race, what ethnicity, whatnot. Make friends. Okay, that's one of the few places where I'm able to make friends very well. Your health is important. You got to respect each other, and it's important to stay nerdy. I'm smart. Okay, at least I do my best to be smart. But there's nothing wrong with being nerdy and smart. You know, we need a lot of these kinds of people, especially people who question, like who critically think critically and ask a lot of questions, and do not spread COVID. Next slide. All right, thank you so much. I know it's a lot of information, and I know it's like what 58 minutes, but thank you so much for watching this presentation. I also want to do a special thanks to Jazzy. You can also follow her, La Jazzy Red, on Instagram. She actually did the did some of the editing as well. So I hope you enjoyed the rest of the stream, and I hope you learned something. Thank you very much, and I want to give a special thanks to Kat for giving me this opportunity to share this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.